public education in the era of Betsy DeVos is an important topic to Americans United. Americans United chairs two coalitions at the national level. One of those is the National Coalition for Public Education. So this issue is important to us for several reasons. The moderator of tonight's event is Juliet Stipeche. She's Director of Education in the Office of the Mayor of the City of Houston. She was a trustee on the Houston Independent School District Board for 5 years, and her college degree from Rice University was in political science, policy studies, and religious studies, so she's well suited to moderate tonight's panel. The panelists who will be joining her tonight are themselves distinguished. We have Richard Carranza, who is Superintendent of Houston Independent School Districts Board. We have John Ogletree, who's a pastor and also a member of a school board, and he's with an organization called Pastors for Texas School Children. Did I get the name of that right? Pastors for Texas Children. That's an important organization that I'm sure he'll tell you about. And Zeth Capo, who is President of the Houston Federation of Teachers and also a member of the board of the Houston Community College. Before turning it over to these esteemed panelists, I do want to give you a little teaser. At the end of the program, I am going to make an announcement that I think a lot of you will find pretty interesting. So I hope that's an encouragement for you to stick around through the end of the program, not only because I expect it to be a very interesting and worthwhile program, but because I hope I've piqued your curiosity and you're going to want to see what this announcement is that I have to make. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to our moderator and begin the program. Thank you.
Well, it's such a oh my goodness, that is one hot mic. First of all, I want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to spend this evening with you and to be able to have a very candid, wonderful conversation with our three distinguished panelists. So, you know, the topic of tonight's event is the future of public education in the era of Betsy DeVos. And so I just wanted to start by reading a brief passage, and I hope and I wonder if anyone here recognizes where these words come from. Today, education is perhaps the most important function of state and local governments. Compulsory school attendance laws and the great expenditure for education both demonstrate our recognition of the importance of education to our democratic society. It is required in the performance of our most basic public responsibilities. It's the very foundation of good citizenship. Today, it's the principal instrument in awakening the child to cultural values and preparing him for professional training and in helping him adjusting normally to his environment. In these days, it's doubtful that any child may reasonably expect to succeed in life if he or she is denied an opportunity of an education. Such an opportunity, where the state has undertaken to provide it, is a right which must be made available to all on equal terms. So, Gold Star, it is Brown versus Board of Education, 1954. And so it's interesting that the language from that seminal U.S. Supreme Court case rings so relevant, including in today's modern time. And in the discussion that we're having in terms of the importance of public education, especially when there's been so much discussion in terms of school choice, vouchers, and many other isms and languages that are now used to talk about public education. So to our panel, I'd like to first just ask a general question to each to provide an introductory statement of their belief in public education today and how the words of Brown versus Board of Education, what it means to them.
Good evening, everyone. I was a little shy about the microphone. I didn't want to be so high. So I want to thank Juliet for moderating and being our moderator this evening. I also want to thank all of you for being here. A topic which I think should be the #1 topic we're talking about everywhere in Texas and everywhere in the United States. I fundamentally believe in a free public education as the cornerstone of our democracy. It is. You must have an educated populace in order to continue with the enlightened way of society living, which is called democracy. The longest serving democracy we have in the world is in the United States. And make no mistake, it's because, and historians have wrote about the fact that free and public education without question has been one of the cornerstones in ensuring a free and just society. That being said, I think there are forces at play which are attempting to undermine the very nature of a democratic society and the very nature of an educated society. There's an old saying that says, if you want to do whatever you want to do, and I'm using my own words here, just keep people uninformed and uneducated, and they'll buy anything you sell them. I think if you look at the recent election, you might see that happening. Now, why is that so important for us? Because I will tell you that as America gets browner and blacker and poorer, the role of a free and public education is more critical now than it's ever been. If we truly believe that we want to empower our citizens and become the rich mosaic of historical perspectives, then we must ensure a free and public education. And I'll talk a little bit more about what I think about this whole new era of vouchers and you know, I'll talk about that in a minute. But I will say this, and this will be the last thing. Until we in the state of Texas and we in the United States view public education as an investment in the future, and stop looking at public education as an expense on a line item. The expense that can be cut, the expense that can be reduced, the expense that doesn't need to be fully funded. Until we start looking at public education as an investment, then we are going to be in a world of uneducated, unsupported future citizens who are not going anywhere. They're staying right here in our cities, right here in our state. And if we don't educate them, and we educate them at the highest degree, then we will assuredly end up supporting them without them adding to our tax base.
I too agree with the words that were articulated from the Brown versus Board of Education decision. Public education is vital to the continuation of our democracy. It is vital to our freedom. It is something that is morally right, not just constitutionally right. It is morally right that every child born in this country would have the right to public education. What I am concerned about, and I'm the product of public education. I come from a mother who was a teacher, and I in schools in Dallas IST and Wilmer Hutchins and public education is in my blood. My wife was a teacher and a counselor in public schools, and I know the benefits of it. I have 4 children that have gone through the public schools and have all graduated and gotten their college degrees, 2 of them with masters. And we wouldn't be where we are today as a country without public education. The thing that troubles me, and as we talk about this age of Betsy DeVos, it is a freedom. What we have to understand is that freedom is and always has been fragile. One appointment, two appointments to the Supreme Court could change the freedom that has been existing for decades. And it is organizations like yours, it's people like you, it is public servants that are before you that must stand up and be advocates and do everything that we can to support public education. I too believe that the reason why public education has been under attack the way it has been is because of the browning of our country. The haves and the have-nots, that gap is growing, and we need to understand that if we do not support public education, there will be a permanent underclass that will never be able to live and reach the American dream. That's why we have to be vigilant. That's why we have to be advocates for public education. So I thank God for my upbringing. I thank God. I believe that I'm on the right side, and I will fight for it.
So I'll first acknowledge that I picked the wrong seat because I had to follow the superintendent and the preacher in discussing this first question that comes out of the gate. As a teacher, I'm surrounded by educators all the time, students, families, and others, and it is really, really easy because of what we do and what we believe and what we feel to think of public schools being built to serve the needs of kids and families, systems built to serve the needs of kids and families, when in fact, public education systems are built to serve our society. They're built to ensure that our society not only thrives, but continues in a manner that we are used to, in a manner that supports critical thinking and analysis, independent judgment and thought, the ability to be able to speak out, engage yourself in your governmental process, and ensure the safety and security of yourself, your family, and your fellow neighbor through the rights that we have enshrined in our Constitution. That is where we get back to with Brown versus Board of Education, because what we've seen, and it's no coincidence that from the 50s to today, from when Brown versus Board of Education first came into play to the era of Betsy DeVos, we have seen a decrease in the fundamental strength and structure of public education and an increase in our rapid movement over the last 10 years from being a functional democracy to an autocracy. There are individuals out there right now in the political science world that are looking at indicators and flags that we have developed as a society that are markers that are telling of the changing, potentially, to a different type of governmental structure. A governmental structure that we as a country have fought against for hundreds of years. And I firmly believe that it is not only a right for all of our students, regardless of where they come from, regardless of their background, to have a free and appropriate public education within our country. It is our responsibility as citizens to ensure that we do not roll up the ladder behind ourselves to them, that they have that ability to be able to step up and step forward so that when we are ready to move out of the place that we're in, there is someone that comes behind me to take my place as a teacher that can critically analyze and think and cares about the person that's in the neighborhood. there's someone else that can come behind me to lead the organization that represents our teachers, to do the work that you do, because I love what I do, but I have visions of doing something different one day and being able to move into an era of safe and secure retirement and maybe be able to give back and volunteer. But if our government isn't stable, if our populace has not had the opportunity to move forward, then we're going to have to continue working some realms that I think that, quite frankly, most Americans wouldn't imagine that they would have to do in a country like ours. So that's what public education to me means. That's what the words in Brown versus Board of Education mean to me. And that's why we have to do everything that we can in our power to resist, persist, insist, and enlist for the sake of public education in this country. Thank you.
So we know that the Senate passed this voucher bill. And we know with some recent events in terms of what came out of the House, it seems as though the brakes have been put on an attempt to create a voucher system in the state of Texas. How did the system of choice turn into what we're seeing today in a rhetoric that has become so aggressive in terms of privatization and the utilization of vouchers?
Can I take a first shot? Before I answer this question, though, I can't help but notice there's a gentleman in the audience wearing a Korean War cap. Sir, thank you for your service. All of my family served in World War II. Thank you for your service. So I recently read an article, aside from the emotional aspects of vouchers and choice. Choice really isn't choice. But I read a wonderful article in the Atlantic by a gentleman named Jason Blakely. I would recommend it to you. And what he posits in his article is that all of this talk about free markets and choice, really the essence of making public education a commodity, really dates back to the 70s from economic theory called neoliberalism. And if you think about neoliberalism, it's a creation of markets that is necessary for individual freedom. Now, who's against individual freedom? Not me. But you see, when you think about a neoliberalistic way of thinking about education and a commodity, where you think about choice, then it really is a function of winners and losers. And nowhere was this more evident to me than prior to my seeing the light and coming to Houston. I worked for 7 years in the Bay Area. And in the Bay Area, where some people would say is the epicenter of technological innovation and startups, and you hear these ridiculous stories of 19-year-olds becoming millionaires overnight. Some of that's true. But what you don't hear is the stories of the fact that 1 out of every 7 innovative ideas fails. And if you are aggressive, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 out of every 15 innovative ideas fail. So you see people innovate, but they expect to fail, and failure is okay. Now, juxtapose that into the public education system. How many of us have the luxury, or even the belief, or even the moral authority to say that we're going to experiment, make public education a commodity, people can choose, and there will be winners and losers? Who will be the losers? The losers are, aside from society, the losers are children. And what I would, let me give you a perfect example. So some of the folks that are well, maybe all of you, I'm not gonna make this stereotype. Does anybody know what I'm talking about when I say Facebook? I take that as a yes. You see, Facebook wasn't the original inventor of a social media network site. It was an application called Friendster. And Friendster, if you ever saw the movie, Friendster was first on the block with that social media site, and you could friend other people. The problem Friendster had was that Friendster didn't have a setup. They didn't have a look that the consumer found to be attractive. So as a result, Facebook came along, had a much better interactive software, had a much better way of actually being able to friend people and to add people. And have you ever heard of Friendster before? You see, it's a loser. It went away. Now think about that. That is neoliberalism. That's winners and losers. That's a commodity. The commodity is a social integration application. Now, one could say that there's really no big loss in the fact that Friendster went away. Nobody really felt it, except if you're the owner of Friendster, right? But think about when we make a commodity out of public education, who the losers are. And I'll just say one more thing about this. I also worked for a time in Nevada. And in the state of Nevada, they implemented a very aggressive school choice system. And 4 years later, the analysis has been done. The greatest purveyors and the greatest number of people that took advantage of the school choice system in the state of Nevada were not the poor families, which everyone hears, they need choice for better schools. It was the more affluent, the more educated, the people that already knew how to work the system and had connections. They're the ones that took advantage of the school choice system. And what you ended up finding in the state of Nevada was that schools that had a predominance of poor students, predominance of African American students, of Latino students, were the very schools that suffered diminishing returns on their funding, and those were the schools that were predominantly closed. You see, they were the failures. So this whole voucher system and this whole voucher discussion about giving poor kids and poor families an option is really neoliberalistic jargon for saying we want to create winners and losers. But that's just my perspective.
There's a lot of truth into that. Several years ago, I was invited to Austin free to come and stay a couple of nights in a real nice hotel, and it was to talk about the education in Texas, and it had a lot of African American pastors who were there from all across the state, and lo and behold, once the dinner was served, then that program was put before us about how we need to help those poor, failing schools and those students who are going to these schools, and they need choice. They need choice. And so this has been in the works for years. Senate Bill 3, it's been in the works for years. And our Lieutenant Governor made it plain. This was one of his top priorities. Choice, vouchers, whatever. But they came up with this bill, the ESA, this educational support to change the language. This is not a voucher bill. This is not a voucher bill. We just want to help parents with choice. So it's not a voucher, but if the parent who wants to take advantage of this choice can now get some money from the state to take their child to a private school. And the argument in Austin, I went there to testify, signed up before 8 o'clock. For some reason, around 5:30, they hadn't called my name. I don't know what happened with that. But the argument from Senator Taylor and others was, look, we're trying to help parents. We want to give them choice. There's no choice in Texas. And there is choice in Texas. If you want to homeschool, that's your choice. You can do that. If you want to put your child in private school, you have the choice to do that. Even within a school district, if a school is not working for your child, you can, each school district, ours does, have a means for you to get your child into a better school. But they use the choice rhetoric, the choice argument, to try to make it palatable, to try to make it look like we're trying to help. And the argument was, too, coming from the senators, we want to help those poor kids get out of those schools. Well, the average cost of private education in Texas depends on where you are. It runs from $8,000 to almost $11,000, and there are some that run a whole lot more. So no reimbursement of $6,000 is going to help, or $7,000 is going to help a poor parent. The parent still has to find $2,000, $3,000, $4,000. So it was just a way, this choice argument to make things seem palatable. I'm so happy that the House refused to follow that argument. But it just goes to show you that next legislative session, there's going to be a new way, a new argument, a new language that we can use, and we'll have to be ready.
So I know that we're in an AU meeting, but again, I'm sitting next to a pastor, so I'm going to say, first and foremost, thank God for Dan Huberty and rural Texas. I'm actually, I may be on one side of the aisle, but I want to make sure that we work and grow across the aisle to find people that are interested in making good policy. The things that divide us should not be what makes this country run. We should be focusing on the things that work for everyone and where we can find commonality. And I'm very glad that he basically stood up for good policy rather than for an ALEC playbook. American legislators. There's a couple things I would say about the choice issue, and the first one would be, I would bring you back to my opening comments, that this is where it really becomes important that we understand public education is here for our society and not here for individual students or individual families. As Pastor Ogletree said, they can make those choices to go elsewhere. However, those dollars are not, per se, their dollars. Any more so than my tax dollars are there and available for me because I don't want to go to the city park in my area, but I would rather have a voucher to go to the country club. It doesn't work that way. That's not what this is about. It's ensuring that we have quality, basic services for everybody because we have to build a society. I also taught in private school, and I don't want to pigeonhole any individual that makes decisions and choices. I taught kids that came from families that were there because they did not want their kids in schools with those other kids. They were there. I taught students that were in families that were there because there was fear for safety and security in some of the schools, and that's an issue that we have to work on as a society. I taught families who had kids there because they wanted a religious background because that was their choice in their educational processes, and that is okay. So it's not about individuals that want one thing or another, because when you really talk to most of these individuals, when you talk to most of these families, most of them really don't want vouchers because they don't want, they made a conscious decision to take a different route. And they don't necessarily want to cross that boundary. And they don't necessarily think that they should be pulling away from public education. And if you talk to many parents that are in private schools, they'll give you that message, and they understand that they're making a conscious individual choice for whatever that reason is. And so it's not really all of them that are quite pushing, because you see some people in our Texas legislature, they will talk out of both sides of their mouth, if you haven't noticed that. Because we actually do have public dollars going to private private institutions to provide educational opportunities for kids, and that has been happening for decades. That is nothing new. We used to work in my role, in advocacy roles, not only for teachers and kids, but for individual students. Sometimes where we would butt heads with the school district because a student really needed services that we weren't able to provide in the school, but it was going to cost the district a significant amount of money to put that child in an agency that could provide those services. And we would have to go to bat for that. And because that was in the best interest of that society, that classroom, those kids and that families, that's why we were willing to take that step. Because, and it wasn't for me that these dollars were taking away from the other kids in that point. It was meeting those needs, but a society made that decision. A public entity together with the people that they represent made that decision. So when you have the same individuals coming out of the same circles as Betsy DeVos, wanting to talk about privatization, vouchers, and school choice, yet they make policies that restrict public education agencies from providing special education services to kids that need them because of those decisions, then you have policy makers, politicians, and others that talk out of both sides of their mouth. They don't really equate these things to what's in the best interest of children or families. I think that's a false narrative. It is in the best interest of individuals who have another agenda to push. And I firmly believe that that is exactly what we're seeing, because if you look further than just the K-12 issue with vouchers, look at what Betsy DeVos is doing in higher education. When you strip away all of the safeguards that have allowed our students to not be fleeced in student loans, that allow our children, or our students that grow up to actually have that shot at higher education, and you're going to take those things away, you're going to endanger the Pell Grant that allows so many of our students. I would not have gone to college without the Pell Grant. I would not have graduated without being able to take out student loans. And because I did suffer in my graduate level with having to deal with ACS was my loan provider, I was one of the lucky ones that was able to get out of those student loans because my house property value increased in Houston enough so that I could refinance my home. These things are real for those of us that have to deal with these things on a daily basis. And the changes that they want to make are not in the best interest of families, students, and others. And they are not in the best interest of our society. So we definitely need to push back from those. And I'm so glad to say that we actually have something to be proud of so far in the state of Texas, that vouchers have been given the door by the House, and we hope that moves to the end.
Some individual questions in terms of getting some more background, given your individual experiences. And I want to first start with Superintendent Carranza. So you come to us from California, and you're here now during our lovely Texas legislative session. I'm just curious about the difference from California to Texas and what you've learned in terms of this recent legislative session and the impacts that it has on the Houston Independent Schools.
Yeah, so thank you. So I spent 7 years in California, but I was born in Tucson, Arizona. I have to just say that because my roots are really Western. But the interesting difference, they're pretty stark. Here we have a biennium every 2 years. In California, the legislature meets every year. So it's a constant interaction with legislators. Obviously, the political winds are a little more liberal in California. So we're just a little. The whole conversation around vouchers is a non-starter in California. The biggest conversation in California is what is the state going to allocate in terms of income tax receipts, sales tax receipts, gasoline tax receipts to not only pre-K-12 public education, but also higher education. And you juxtapose that with this increasing cost of living in the state of California, which is, in many respects, the former district where I was superintendent, San Francisco, one of the highest markets in terms of rent anywhere in the United States. I think they surpassed Manhattan. So we could not hire teachers and keep teachers in the city. Unless we paid them $170,000 a piece, they couldn't afford to live in the city, so we had these excruciating commutes. So the political environment's different, but I think we also had some similarities. So in the city of San Francisco, where I was superintendent, we had a student population of 58,000 students. Now, you compare that to Houston Independent School District, where we're 215,000 students. So you think, San Francisco, why so small? Well, if you truly had every pre-K-12 eligible student that actually went to the public schools, it'd be close to 100,000 students in the city of San Francisco. But think about this. 80% of the residents of San Francisco do not have school-aged children. 80%. Very young population, very retired population. Of the 20% that do have school-aged children, 30 to 32% of that population sends their kids to private schools. And the private schools in San Francisco are private schools. $50,000 a year tuition to go to some of these schools. The Waldorf High School, $50,000 a year. So, but what was different was that although the population was either very young or much retired and didn't have children in the school system, they never ever did not support a public referendum on public education, to the point where the city stepped up and was able to supplement teachers' salaries in a desperate attempt to try to keep teachers in the city. Now that's neither good nor bad, it's just different. What I have found, and I've spent at least, initially the legislative session, I spent at least every other week in Austin, meeting with legislators, lobbying, testifying. I have now find myself, as the session winds down, there every week. So I'll be there Wednesday again, working with legislators, trying to get them to understand the real effects of what their policies are making. And I have to echo what Zeth said. Thank God for Chairman Huber and Chairman Speaker Strauss, for taking a very, very strong stand around this voucher issue. So similarities and differences, but I will tell you, I really do prefer to be in Texas, because when you look at the diversity, and I know that you may not see it yet, but what we have in Texas that we did not have in California was this extremely diverse population, where it's not just Latino, it's not just African American, but we have this incredible diversity that is a real strength, and it's in particular in Houston, where you may or may not know, but we are the most diverse city in America. That has some real benefits for us as we think about what curriculum looks like and we think about diversity in thought.
Now, Pastor John, I have a question. You're a trustee for Cypress-Fairbanks, pastor of the First Metropolitan Church, and member of the Pastors for Texas Children. What are your thoughts in terms of folks that may say, why are you not supporting vouchers in private schools? Do you think that we should be allowing children the option to be able to go to have the public funds help them continue praying and learning more about religion?
Well, my background, you have to understand that I am a product of the civil rights movement. When I was in high school, I was the first group of students that integrated what had been an old white school. And I remember in Dallas, I was raised in Dallas back at that time, a major church that opened a private school so that white students would not have to attend school with any black children. That is indelibly stamped into me. So just because you have a school and you're going to teach faith, I know that the embryonic nature of such private schools. And as I said, I have seen the benefits and the beauty of public schools. As the superintendent has said, Houston, the most diverse city in this country, and in South Fair we have 115,000 students, and we do everything we can to embrace the students. We've even opened up what we call new arrival centers for students who come in who don't speak English, to acclimate them to America, to Texas, to education. We embrace that, and I believe in that as a minister of the gospel. The church should teach faith, doctrine. I believe the public schools should teach, and I'll go back to what we used to say, reading, writing, and arithmetic. Now here's what happens though in our present context. An education is more than what happens in the classroom. By the diversity that has come to Houston and come to the United States, our students are now getting an education with different cultures, people from different countries that you just couldn't pay for. And it's going to make them even better prepared for this global society, global economy and everything. So as a minister of the gospel, I support public education. If there is a private school, go ahead and have it. If you have the money, send your kid there. That's my stance.
Thank you. Trustee Capo, you serve on the Houston Community College Board. You're also the president of the Houston Federation of Teachers. I'm just curious, you've been a teacher for the longest of times. When did the age of Betsy DeVos come into fruition in terms of the time that it became easy to turn teachers into punching bags, and what can educators do to fight?
So it feels like to me that public education has always been the cycle I've lived my life around. I went to public education, I graduated from high school. The summer always meant something to me. Half the time it meant going to work with my father, which was not particularly fun all the time, but I learned a few things out of it. Going to college, working my way through that, attending, going to school, moving through that piece, and it seems like there was a shift from the time I finished high school in the 90s, or 1990, to the time I started teaching in 1994, that teachers weren't treated, or maybe it was my perspective that changed, they weren't looked at and treated the same way that I think that we thought about our teachers whenever I was in school. But what I found, or what I recall, is my first year teaching, being involved in issues of having to go fight for funding. So these same things that I've done in my work now, that we seem to have to do every session, every legislative session, every piece that's in there, they now seem like part of the cycle that continues in life, year after year, time after time. I don't know a year in time that we haven't had to fight and struggle for funding in public schools. What I understood over the years is the reasons why. That there were people that I didn't know at the time that I didn't see at the time, they were doing everything that they could to roll the ladder up behind them so that the students I was teaching back home in Miami weren't maybe able to get on the same ladder that I did and get through college. I think that part of the problem is that during that era in the 90s, and that because we were not paying attention to some of those forces, that we allowed our profession to be separated from our society and from our families and from the students that we taught. Societal ills cropped up. A couple of different ideas in education, whether it was the sparking of the charter school movement that really kind of started in the 80s, and as we realize now, the nation at risk that came out of President Reagan's era really started many of these thoughts and processes into place that brought us to a point in the 90s where we were being separated from the people that we represented. Our voice wasn't there. We weren't engaging in that level to make sure that we didn't become the scapegoats for all of the reasons and the narrative that was being put forward to really serve a different agenda. And that agenda was injecting market-based capitalism into the largest public economic sector left in our country. Because remember, the 70s and the 80s were the final destruction of really the public health system when we brought the for-profit management in the 70s to our hospitals and others. So you saw the crumbling of our health system based on the injection of the profit motive. And that was really what was being taken hold of in education. And there was a point where we realized that was happening and started to wake up and not allow our organizations, our unions, ourselves to be separated from our families and our students. Because what I've heard time and time again from many individuals in our own city who have thought things about us, who had been told things about us, when they actually had the opportunity to work with us to make their own critical decisions, we weren't anything like that they had been told that we were. I have two fantastic teachers sitting in the audience right now who work with their community each and every day over the north side, a high school in a district and area that I represent as a trustee. We figure out ways to make sure kids are able to get to school safely because they have a problem at that high school, being able to walk safely to and from home. We figure out ways that we're able to engage all of the resources that our society provides for by ensuring that not just the students that have a leg up and maybe the ones that everyone goes to for AP courses or dual credit, but those students that maybe no one really pushed and thought about going, get into dual credit programs and access the Northline campus next to where we are. Those are the things that we do together to change that narrative, to really focus on what's important so that people understand not only who we are as individuals, as teachers, and why we do what we do, but being able to help them understand the forces around the outside that have their own agenda and why we're being pulled into this vortex and maybe used as pawns for another end game. I think that's very important. People's eyes have been opened up. There's a very different feeling today than there even was 10 years ago. The corporate reform movement, while it's not dead, it certainly is being challenged across the country everywhere that we are now because those neoliberal policies haven't worked. They haven't created the utopia that we were told that they were going to create.
So I know we're approaching 8:05, 8:10, is that correct? And I wanted to have the opportunity to allow the audience to ask some questions.
like to ask each of you to respond to a proposition that I'm going to offer, that there is a positive correlation between the for-profit prison system and the increase in the support for vouchers and charter school funding.
Who would like to take that?
Let's let Zeth go first.
So this has been an offshoot of some of those same pieces, right? Quite frankly, I think it, and I'm just going to be blunt about it. There was a segment that I think really thought, these are throwaway kids, let's go make money off of them. Just like the individuals in the prison system are throwaway humans, let's go make money off them, we can do a better job, et cetera, et cetera. Same premise, same idea behind it. I think that people started waking up to both of those analogies and figuring out how these things were interconnected. They weren't separated. There were oftentimes the same players involved in developing those policies. They had the same connections to the same people in power that were making the decisions to allow those things to happen. And for too long, they really stayed in the shadows. They weren't brought up to the public sphere. And I think that we're really starting to see some changes in that direction now, not as far as we want to see them, but I think that we're moving in the right direction.
Yes. The truth of the matter is that the prisons and the growth of the prison system has been directly correlated to education, public education. What the third grade test scores have been a predictor of the pathway from public schools to prison. And so there is a direct correlation. The shame of it is the same legislators, the same congressmen that would vote to cut public education, that would vote to cut Head Start, are the same ones that vote for the expansion of this prison system and this privatization. And it is tragic. I think, as my brother said, I think the trend, we have a glimmer of light because there is a recognition now that all the money that's being spent to incarcerate and not to rehabilitate is really costing. And the shame of it is that the only reason why they may change their mind is because of economics, not because of the human nature, the human capacity of caring for an individual and rehabilitating. But there is a door opening for this change to come about. The documentary 13 and the book, The New Jim Crow, are some powerful storytellers that are helping to shape and reshape thoughts toward this mass incarceration and this privatization. So we hope that it continues.
Yeah, I would just say there is an absolute correlation to third grade literacy rates and the number of prison beds you need to have. No one would ever accuse the state of Arizona of being the bastion of enlightened educational policy, but I started my career in Arizona, and I do remember that that was an actual statistic. Now, we ended up skewing the statistic because during a time period there in the mid-'80s and early '90s, where they ramped up immigration enforcement, it skewed the statistics because then they needed additional beds for undocumented people as well. So then There was all kinds of funny schemes that happened with private prisons and private jail cells and etc. But just think about this. In the state of Texas this very year, the per pupil allocation to educate a public school student in the state of Texas is no more than $10,000. It depends where you are, but it's no more than $10,000. So let's assume it's $10,000 per student. The cost to incarcerate a juvenile in the state of Texas is $132,000 a year. So you're talking about, when I mentioned the investment versus an expense, well, if it's an economic issue, they should look at the math, right? If you don't invest now and you're only investing $10,000, then I can assure you that you're going to get students that are not going to be students for very long, are going to find a way to make a buck, and later you're going to incarcerate them for $132,000 a year. So for me, that math is that math is superintendent proof. Even I can understand that, right? So there's an absolute correlation to that statistic, unfortunately.
So we'll go ahead, since we're looking at the time, allow them to answer the questions. Okay.
This morning, on the front page of the Houston Chronicle, there was a story about a town in Indiana, Bloomington, Indiana, a couple of hours from Indianapolis, a rural town where the mayor and the labor unions decided to try to keep quiet about the shutting down of United Technologies and Carrier air conditioning. Well, they're going to be shut down. With that in mind, are we going to be able to hear from the labor unions, from trustees, and from the superintendents, not with a quiet voice, but with a unified, loud voice saying that public education needs to flourish in Houston and in the state of Texas?
Well, I guess the quick way that I would answer that is who believed that that wasn't going to happen anyway, because it was just like everything else that we were told during the unfortunate circumstances that just passed. Clearly, workforce development is vitally important, and we know that globalization is the main driving factor behind that. How do we make sure that people have relative skills that are transferable from one industry to another? We're not going to solve the problem of manufacturing and jobs without connecting it to appropriate levels of high critical thinking skills that can be mobile and transferable from one area to another.
Yes, I think we're going to do our part. I think that move has already been in the works with across the state, and making sure that our students are prepared, not just to go to college, but they have skills and wage earning capacity. We're going to voice our opinion. We're going to be loud. I think all of us. But our voice is somewhat discounted because we are expected to support education. We're expected. Superintendent, school board member, head of the teachers union. What really has to happen is your organization, people like you, to speak up, to voice what you see and what your needs and what your passion is. That is what's going to do it. It's going to be your vote and your voice. Your vote and your voice is going to do it, because we are expected to support what we are part of.
So I think, thank you, Pastor, but I think the response is absolutely yes. So we have formed, and we've been very local in Austin, an urban council where the superintendents from the 8 largest school districts in the state of Texas, HISD, Dallas, Fort Worth, El Paso, San Antonio, I mean, you name them. We've banded together and we've said, look, there may be some issues that are more advantageous to one district or another, but in general, we have so much commonality about what we need to be advocating for. We actually show up in mass in Austin and are knocking on doors and meeting with people. Now the danger is, and I say this just a little facetiously, is that most of us are Hispanic superintendents. So we think, oh my goodness, if there's a raid, all of a sudden, what's going to happen to us? But all kidding aside, it's very important for our voices to be heard, and we're being very, very vocal about it. But what we're also doing is we're bringing solutions to legislators. Look, this is a bad bill. Vouchers are a bad bill. What if you increase or give us the ability to be districts of innovation, where you give us the opportunity to create more choices within our various school districts? Lo and behold, that became law. Many of us are taking advantage of that. So I think you're seeing more than ever our unions, our policymakers at the local level, our school board members, and administrators that are uniting around a common policy, because that's typically been what we do. We go across purposes, and then no one ever gets anything done amidst all of the chaos. This has been a very different legislative session from what I understand.
Hi. I have a question for Mr. Capo. In your first answer to the first question, you mentioned something about there are studies of markers that are showing a fundamental shift in the nature of our government. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that, and where or what I could go to learn more about that outside of tonight's meeting, what I could read up on. Appreciate that.
I'd have to go pull up the articles that I was taking a look at, but there's some pieces around, for example, one huge piece about this, as a matter of fact, it's a group that Juliet can talk about, she's on the advisory board. The New Literacy Project, it really is it's an important piece to allow students to kind of differentiate between fake news and real news, and that is one of the huge parts of it. When you hear the buzzword today of fake news, but in political terms, in my history books, that was called propaganda. And propaganda is one of the major pieces that move a democratic society from being democracy to totalitarianism, autocratic societies. That is one of the moves that have moved forward. I think that there are some of the markers in the manner in which our culture has decided to shift in its speak and how we treat one another, and how we have allowed social or public discourse to become one of detrimental to other individuals in society. But it's also one of those markers. If you go back, there are several of those same indicators that have been identified and addressed through how the Third Reich came into being in Germany in the early 1900s. People joke about that. We have unfortunately, we have people at the White House making really stupid comments about things like that, but there is a reality that there is very common practice that you see over and over where society starts shifting. And I would be happy to start look up some of those and identify some of the sources and send them over to Barbara so that she can share them with the group.
Just say something too. I think too, even if you don't read any of those articles, the move across this country to deny people the right to vote.
Yes.
The keystone of our democracy. All the laws of these some 30 states led by Republican governors, with this false narrative that that people are voting illegally, there's fraud, voter fraud. If we buy into that, if we allow that, gosh, democracy, I mean, if they knock that one down, then they'll get something else. And it is being set up just for an elite and certain people that will have the right to vote. And we have to stand against that.
And because I can't help myself, Pastor, so I would also add to that list, on the political side, Citizens United. What effect has Citizens United, that Supreme Court decision, had on the political narrative? The rich get richer, and the voiceless get voiceless.
Hi. I have a question about high-stakes testing and how it has affected the teaching profession. And in addition to that, how you foresee education in the age of Betsy DeVos handling things like high-stakes testing. And for those who don't know what high-stakes testing is, it's where you have standardized testing that is tied to teacher evaluations and principal evaluations and school evaluations. Thank you.
So you said teaching profession, so I'll go there. I'm gonna tie it back to what we've seen here in our own district. I'm gonna be biased here, but with all due respect, Houston ISD has been the center of what not to do on a national scale for a very long time. And buying into, with both feet and whole body, this idea of test and punish accountability systems has completely corrupted the way that our teachers interact on campuses. The manner in which we would fire people based on test scores or give them bonuses based on test scores. And the first effect that it had when we first initialized these things were a bit of shock, and people didn't understand what was going on around them. So they woke up one day, there was this big $4,000 bonus in their check. And what we found for the most part were individuals were either very sad about it because other teachers in the area weren't included, or the paraprofessional in their classroom that worked with them very hard, one-on-one with students that pulled them up wasn't included. So we found a lot of these teachers sharing their bonuses. They would share them with their team teachers, they would share them with their paraprofessionals. Then the next year, those same individuals that didn't get a bonus would actually get one so that they would share back. And by the third year, people didn't know what the heck they were doing for this to happen, and they didn't feel bad about it anymore. They just felt like they won the teacher lottery. So they just kind of went throughout their day, and everybody had a smile and knew why it was, until then they brought in the firings. Let the beatings begin. Basically happened. And then what we really saw then was these terrible policies go on steroids. Teachers started closing their doors. No longer would they collaborate and share their best practices with each other to help one another improve. They were deathly afraid that they would be the ones that might be a little lower than the teacher next door. So their instinct was, I've got to work on my classroom. I've got to save my skills and my new tricks that I learned and my way of doing it for my classroom. I can't worry about them anymore. And what happened is our students suffered. Our schools across the district suffered because you snapped something that was fundamentally important to educators, and that is the collaborative process of them being able to work and learn from and with one another.
Yes, so what I would just add to that question is because Zeth and I could not agree more. And it may sound counterintuitive as a superintendent, but I honestly did not expect to be selected superintendent in Houston, because when I interviewed, and I had done my homework, and I knew about the added value, I knew about the bonuses, and when I interviewed with the board, I was very, very honest with the board that philosophically, fundamentally, I disagreed with that approach. Maybe it's because I was in the classroom for 10 years and taught, and actually understood what happens in the classroom. But the other side, I would say, detriment that happens from a testing culture is that if you're a teacher and you know that, number one, your bonus is tied to that test score, or even more draconian, whether or not your livelihood is tied to that test score, then you're going to be darn sure that you're going to test you're going to teach what's tested. And you're going to drill it, and you're going to make sure that they can answer that. And what happens then to the arts? And what happens to freedom of expression? And what happens to reading for pleasure? And what happens to applying mathematics to the real world? If it's not going to be tested, then you're not going to worry about it. And I think what ends up happening then, I'll tell you a true story. I'm 8 months on the job here in Houston. I'm not even a full-term baby yet. But I'll tell you, some of the initial conversations that I had when I got to Houston was that teachers had left HISD in droves. And the word on the street amongst all of our teacher preparation programs in the colleges of education, all in our area and beyond our area, as I met with college deans and college presidents, was, look, the word is out. Nobody wants to come in HISD. Because you're going to teach for a year, then they're going to get fired, and then you've been fired for performance, so who's going to hire you? It was a career killer. And I'm very proud of the fact that the Board of Education in HISD this year has moved completely away from using added value scores as part of the evaluation. Now, does that mean that the expectations are lower? On the contrary, the expectations are higher because we are now educating or endeavoring to educate the whole child. So I would say just this because you touched a touchstone for us. And Zeth and I agree about this, that students should be able to read and they should be able to write, and we should know where they are in terms of reading and writing. But you assess that in a myriad of ways during the school day, and that's the profession and the craft of teaching, to know where your students are and what the next step is. And by the way, that does not happen within an added value system. That only happens when you create the space for professionals to have professional dialogue about the practice. So you're going to see a proposal that we're bringing to the Board of Education where we're actually asking for increased collaboration time for all of our teachers. And we want teachers to be able to collaborate in a very professional way within their contract day, not after school or on the weekends. We know they're going to do that anyway, but let's treat professionals like professionals.
So I know we have lots of questions, but I also want to point out we have some HCC students that are here today that have joined us as part of this conversation. And it's other students that are here, we want to thank you very, very much for being here, for taking the day, for advocating, and for learning. We really, really appreciate your presence. So we're going to have our last question for the evening, but I hope our distinguished panelists will be able to stay for a while longer to answer any questions there. But here's our last question.
Thank you, Judith. First of all, let me thank all of you for coming out this evening as well. Y'all almost opened up a can of worms there. Anyway, we're going to move it back into the educational aspect of things. We know that when schools close, communities are destroyed. That's it. It's over. The game is gone. But there are dots that need to be connected to that school closing. And I think all of you touched on it briefly. That's the economic, the income inequality, all of these other factors, environment, all of these are connected primarily, but when the enrollment in the school drops, then it's no longer profitable to a school district, and we all understand that. But how do you deal with the other aspects that are surrounding that community? And I think you touched on all of them, those isms. Neoliberalism, which I would prefer to neo-colonialism, but that's another story. Racism, as well as the big daddy of them all, the things that are pointed on that, capitalism. That's the real issue that we face, and that addresses all on the political, social, economically, and all aspects of it all. My question, if there's one to be addressed, and I think Dr. Ogletree pointed it out here. They will be advocates, and I know that, because I think I know 2 out of the 3 out there. But he's absolutely right. We have to be the ones who bring about that change. We have to make sure that people go out and vote. And we have to be in supportive of our new superintendent, of Zeth, of Dr. Ogletree, of Juliet. We're the ones that's going to have to make that change. So my question is, how do you motivate and inspire us? You see, what can you say to us? And from my perspective, I found that it is easier and simpler to do by just informing and educating us, making it personal. Let me know how I'm going to feel about it, how my children are going to feel about it, how my grandchildren are going to be affected by it, the entire aspect, the learning ladder, the growing process. So yeah, that's what I want to know.
Brother Pablo, if I could make it personal in this way right here, this is one of the pieces that I wanted to talk about. That's Mr. Trump's budget and Mrs. DeVos's budget. $196 million cut out of the state of Texas for Title II funding and training of teachers and lowering class size. $102 million cut from after-school programs that cover 155,000 students in our state. 41 million cut from tuition assistance for our HCC students that are in the back of the room. And 52 million cut from SELG and federal grants for higher education. So the personal part of that is, since we have a recapture vote happening right now within HISD, we know the state of Texas is not going to do anything about that. So when those $391 million worth of cuts come out of the federal budget, then they're going to be finding $390 somewhere out of our local property taxes if we don't watch out. So everybody in here should be motivated to make that call, send that email, and say your draconian budget cuts are the wrong way to go, because we end up paying for them on a local level.
I think it's important for us to be advocates, but also to educate. I think it's important for us to educate, and every time you advocate, we have to educate, let people know the long-term results of what is coming, the way that is coming, what's going to happen. And as often as we can engage, in our district, we engage citizens. We have a community leadership group, and we engage citizens to keep them informed, let them know what is happening, to help them to study the issues and know how bills will affect our district, what will happen, and they then become advocates and educators, and that's what has to happen. Because we have to do it, and then we have to help someone to see it, and then they do it, then it spreads, and we can't do this. We can stop this wave. We can't do it.
So couldn't agree more. I would just say I have voice envy. Wow, I wish I had your voice. And you say welcome to HISD. No, just kidding. That's a little, people would listen to me if I had that voice. I think it's really important to go beyond who we think we're reaching as well. I agree with what the pastor said and what Mr. Capo said as well. So in HISD, what we're trying to do is reach different communities, not by having communities come to us, but from us going to the community. So I've been in so many Baptist churches. I've been in synagogues. We've been going out and talking to people. We've been doing phone banks on Univision in between the novelas in the evening. People can call in and we're talking in Spanish. But I'll tell you, in 27 years as an educator, I have yet to meet a parent that didn't want their child to do better than they did. So if we can engage parents wherever parents are, and then empower parents, and the only way we empower parents is through information. How do you access those lines of information? How do you access, and contrary to the narrative that's popular right now in our country, not all Spanish-speaking parents are illegal immigrants. To their detriment, let them keep thinking we're all illegal immigrants because yo hablo español perfectamente bien y yo voto. Right? I speak Spanish and I vote. So that's part of the empowering of our communities is let's make sure that we're coming to them with the information they need to engage and then be participatory in our legislative process.
Pastor, you had
Yes, I wanted to say also that in our district, we've decided to get aggressive with our message. We've engaged a marketing firm. You will see some of our commercials on television as we promote our district and what our district does. We've got billboards. We were now doing commercials because we just say we're not going to sit back. We're going to be aggressive with our message. We're going to let the community know what we're about and what we're doing. And so, I hope some of you will see some of what we're doing to be aggressive in that area.
So I want to thank the panelists for your fantastic conversation that we've had tonight. One thing that my takeaway from this is, like, in the age of Betsy DeVos, what do we have to do? We got to vote, and we have to be active, and we have to be engaged, and we must be involved. That's right. We got to use the telephone, the email. That's right. Make sure you call your state representative, your senator, especially now that the legislature is in session. But most importantly, remember, we have great, fantastic, outstanding leaders who believe in community. We live in a very, there's an old Chinese curse, we live in interesting times, right? And so, but guess what? Harris County and Houston, not only are we the indicator of the most diverse city in the country, we also have a very progressive mayor, Mayor Sylvester Turner. We have a progressive superintendent in Superintendent Carranza. We have leadership in Cypress-Fairbanks. We have an outstanding trustee and president of the Houston Federation of Teachers. But in this audience, we have fantastic, dedicated people who believe in public education, in children, in families, in our community. Fight, be an advocate. You will make a difference. And we can make sure that public education is preserved.
Thank you so much, all of you, to you for coming, and to our esteemed panelists and moderator. You know, the future of public education with Betsy DeVos in charge of the Department of Education may give us all reason for concern. But with people like this in charge of our education system, as leaders in our public education system here in the Houston area, I think we can all rest easier at night. Thank you so much. I know I was impressed. We've talked about what we can all do, and we've all been urged to make phone calls and that sort of thing. But what I want to ask you to do is stay connected to Americans United. Stay connected so you can stay informed, so you can be active, and so you can share with other people the work of our organization, both nationally and our chapter. There are lots of different ways you can do that. If you're a member already, please keep your membership up to date and stay in touch with us by reading our email. If you aren't a member, we invite you to join tonight. Membership is only $25 a year. You get a copy of our great monthly magazine. If you want to join a monthly, enroll in our monthly membership plan, it starts at $10 a month, and the big advantage of that is you get less mail from Americans United. And by the way, membership for students is free. If you'd like to join tonight, we have board members in the back of the room who are happy to take your membership. If you want to learn a little bit more about us, we invite you to join online at our website at auhouston.org. If you want to learn more about us, we've got literature in the back of the room. We have contact cards you can take that have our social media contacts on it. And again, whether you're a member or non-member, we invite you to, or we encourage you to read our email. And also you can, if you're a social media user, follow us on social media. Two more things, or one more thing before I tell you that announcement I promised you. I mentioned that we do public speaking. If you belong to a club or organization that has speakers, please consider inviting us. We have lots of people who can come and speak about this issue, about our organization, and about specific issues like prayer, vouchers, and that sort of thing. We'd love to come and speak to your group, so contact us. Now, finally, that announcement that I promised you. As many of you know, particularly if you're members of our organization, our longtime executive director, the Reverend Barry Lynn, is retiring later this year after being executive director for 25 years. He's been here many times, and if you've heard him, it's always been a treat. Well, it hasn't been decided, but it's almost certain that he will be here in Houston in October as I guess you could call it a goodbye or farewell tour, to speak to us for the last time as executive director. We're still working out the details, so again, I encourage you to watch your email or watch Facebook for that. If he does indeed come, and we think he will, again, we could use your help planning this event. And again, we hope to see you all there. So thanks for coming tonight. Please keep in touch. And we invite you to stay, have some more food, mingle, and ask us if you have any questions. Thank you.